All right. So we've solved triangles and now we're going to start on graphing. The main equation for when we're graphing is this equation given right here. This y equals a either sine or cosine b times x minus c in parentheses plus d, okay? And so this is our main equation. And a, b, c, and d are all going to do something to the graph. And we're going to talk about each of those as we go, either today or tomorrow. But let's talk about the basic graph of sine and cosine. So the basic graph of sine or cosine, first of all, the period of sine is 2 pi, or 360 degrees. Okay, that means that every 2 pi or every 360 degrees, it repeats itself. Okay, the domain of this graph is negative infinity to infinity. That means everything we put into it works. But the range of this graph is only from -1 to 1. That means all of its values fall from -1 to 1. That means it includes -1 and +1. The x-intercepts are whole numbers, whole number pi's, and the y-intercept is 0. The max of this graph is 1, and the min is -1. And this is if the graph isn't shifted. And every graph of sine and cosine has 5 key points in one period. And so I like to call them the midline or the baseline, the max, the midline, the min, and the midline for the graph of sine. Okay? Now the graph of cosine is very similar to the graph of sine. It has a period of 2 pi, or 360 degrees. Its domain is also from -infinity to infinity. Its range is also from -1 to 1. Its x-intercepts are at half pi's. Half pi's. And its y-intercept is at 1. Its normal period max is at 1 and its min is at -1. And its 5 key points, it starts at the max and goes to the midline, then to the min, and then to the midline, and then to the max. Okay, so let's go look at these two graphs down here, and then we'll come back to this up here. All right, so if we pull these values from our unit circle, this would be the sine of 0. Remember, that's the y value. The y value at 0 is 0. And the y value at pi over 2 is 1. And the y value at pi is 0. And the y value at 3 pi over 2 is -1. And the y value at 2 pi is 0. So the graph goes 0, 0. And I'm going to make this 1. This point right here is 1. And I'll make this point -1. So at pi over 2, it goes to 1. At pi, it's 0. At 3 pi over 2, it's -1. And at 2 pi, it's 0. So that's where it goes midline, max, midline, min, midline. And it's a nice, smooth curve through that, okay? So that's one period. So this is one period of the basic sine graph. Cosine is the x value. So the x value at 0 on your unit circle is 1. At pi over 2, it's 0. At pi, it's -1. At 3 pi over 2, it's 0. And at 2 pi, it's 1. So again, we'll make this 1. We'll make this -1. So we'll graph those points, 0, 1, pi over 2, 0, pi -1, 3 pi over 2, 0, and 2 pi 1. So going off our 5 key points, we go from the max to the midline to the min to the midline to the max. And again, we make a nice smooth curve. Okay, and so this is one period of the basic cosine graph. All right, so what do these other numbers do? Well, the number out front, out here, is the height of the wave. That's our amplitude, okay? So and it's always positive, so that's why we use the absolute value of A. So that number out front is our height of the wave, it's our amplitude. And D, so the absolute value of A is amplitude, and D is our midline. It shifts our graph. It's like our baseline. So it shifts our graph up and down. So this number out here shifts the graph up and down. This graph makes the wave taller or shorter, okay? So that's the only thing we're going to talk about today, A and D. So if D is positive, it shifts it up. If D is negative, shifts it down. Now, to find the max and the min, we do the midline plus the amp to get the max and the midline minus the amp to get the min. So let's look at some examples down here. So let's start. Let's talk about what's the amp, what's the midline, what's the max, and what's the min. And then we're going to graph these, okay? So the amplitude here is this value right here. This is 4. And the midline is this number out here. So that's -1. So the max is amplitude plus the midline plus the amplitude, which is 3, right? And the min, according to this, is the midline minus the amplitude. So -1 minus 4. So -1 minus 4. Let's write this down over here. So -1 plus 4 is 3. -1 minus 4 is -5. So what you have here is my midline is at -1. So this is like, instead of my graph being hooked at 0, it's now here. And so then my minimum, 2, 3, 4, is really down here at -5. This is my minimum. And my max is at 1, 2, 3 up here, okay? And so it's a cosine graph. So my cosine graph starts at the max, goes to my midline, then to my min, back to my midline, and then to my max. So this is what my graph looks like now, okay? So this one's written backwards. This would be like 3 sine x plus 2. So here's my amp. My amplitude here is 3. My midline here is 2. So my max is 2 plus 3, which is 5. And my min is 2 minus 3, which is -1. So my midline is right here. So this is my baseline. I usually say baseline. And 2, 3, 4, my max is up here at 5. And my min is down here at -1. So the sine graph starts at the baseline or the midline, goes up to the max, back to the baseline, the midline, to the min, and then back to the midline. So my graph looks like this. Oh, it helps if I go through the point here. Uh-oh. Okay. Oh, I probably should have gone this way since that's number 4. Sorry about that. So here's my amplitude, which is 2. My midline is 3. So my max is 3 plus 2, which is 5. And my min is 3 minus 2, which is 1. Right? Did I do that one right? Yes. Okay. So my midline is 1, 2, 3. My max is at 5 up here, right? My min is here. It's a sine graph, so base, midline, max, midline, min, midline. So connect the dots because that's the sine curve. Okay. Number 3 down here. So here's my, that should say cosine x, excuse me. So my amplitude is 2. My midline is 1. My max is 1 plus 2, which is 3. And my min is 1 minus 2, which is negative 1. So my midline is right here. My max is here. And my min is here. This is a cosine graph, so cosine starts at the max, goes to the midline, down to the min, back to the midline, back to the max. So my graph looks like this. We've already done number 4. So number 4, there it is, and then number 5. So what's different about number 5 is this negative right here, okay? Our amplitude, remember it's positive, should be 3. Our midline should be 2. Our max would be 2 plus 3, which is 5. And our min is going to be 2 minus 3, which is negative 1. So my midline is here. My max is here. And my min is 2 minus 3. This is here. Now, what does this negative do? Well, this negative reflects the graph. So all the maxes become mins and all the mins become maxes. So sine usually starts at the midline, but instead of going up to the max, we're going to go down to the min and then back to the midline. And instead of going down to the min, we're going up to the max. So all of them are backwards. So the graph goes this way, this way. Okay. So same thing happens here. Your amplitude here is 2, but we have a reflection here going on. Your midline is 3. Your max is 3 plus 2, which is 5. And your min is 3 minus 2, which is 1. So 1, that's your min, that's your max, and your baseline is 1, 2, 3 here. Okay. Cosine usually starts at the max, but instead we're going to start at the min. Then we're going to go to the midline, then to the max, then to the midline, then to the then to the min. So your graph is going to look like this. And so that's what you're going to do when you're graphing sine and cosine, using your amplitude and midline, finding your max and your min.